Good afternoon. Wow, I just lost my words. What happens when you stream twice in a day? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Creative Challenge. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon and excited for the last challenge of the week. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. Mwenda and Cody, great to see you. And Kyle just wrapped up his fantastic masterclass. I'm sure people are shuffling it over from there. All right, so last challenge of the week is upon us. Head on over to behance.net/challenge/XD to find all the information about these challenges. As a recap, you can join us in our community chat on Discord, which is a great place to not just chat with the community, but also submit your work, get some feedback, and have a good time. You can watch us live, not just the challenges, but all sorts of content on Adobe Live, which is great. And then share your work, like I mentioned, on Discord or on Behance, on all the different platforms. And then down here, do a little bit of a recap of what we've done this week so far. Ignore these two. Looks like this page is glitching a little bit. But we started off the week on Monday, building out a custom email template. We moved on to animated interactive buttons using Auto Animate and Lottie. We found the perfect color by designing a color picker, or at least a shopping widget with a color picker. And then yesterday, we tackled 3D in Adobe XD using 3D transforms to bring a little bit of depth to your designs, including mobile wallets. Now today, we're going to be exploring typography, components, states, possibly Lottie, by building out a search engine. Doesn't sound very exciting, but some of the techniques that you're going to learn throughout this challenge are definitely going to help you out in your day-to-day project. So go ahead and download the sample file. If you are watching on Behance right now, there is a link right underneath the video, right down there somewhere. And if you want to rewatch this video later on, you can definitely do that right here. All right, let's go ahead and hop over to... Words are hard. It's Friday. I've streamed twice today. Words are hard. We're going to hop over to Adobe XD. And here's the template for today. Again, we're going to be designing a search engine that displays history with balanced typography and flow. And here's some inspiration, which I grabbed from Dribbble, search engines, a little bit of history, little pop-up we're going to be exploring. And then up here, we have a tip. So you can learn about the toggle trigger, which we're going to be exploring today. You can launch this preview, click on this button. It's going to be taking you to a YouTube video. You can learn all about the toggle trigger or the toggle state and have a good time. It's a fun little tool. All right. Hey, Chris, great to see you as well. So we're going to start off with our search engine. I'm going to start by adjusting the background color of this artboard. Nothing too crazy. I'm just going to move it away from pure white. Add a little bit of blue in there, like I always do. Of course, you can add a background as well if you want to, but we want to focus on the main content of this challenge, and that's the actual search field, right? So I'm going to grab the rectangle tool, shortcut key R, and drag one out. Maybe I'll round out the corners completely once I get this in the center. And we now have a field, right? Maybe I'll give it a little bit of a border, but we're going to get a bit fancy in just a moment. So I'm not too concerned about what this looks like. There we go. Done. We have a search field. Have a good day. No, I'm just kidding. So what we're going to do, we're going to put a few elements inside of this search field before we get a touch fancy. Now, the first thing, one of the most important things in terms of a search field of some sort, or many text fields, is some sort of an icon to let users know what this field is for. So I'm going to hop over to my plugins. I do have the icons for design plugin installed, and I'm going to search for search. And I've got this lovely feather search icon right over here, which I'm going to position into place, make it a little bit smaller. Maybe I'll bump down the size just a touch. Maybe I'll also sample this color on the border, which I will go ahead and add to my colors within my document assets. And now I always press that other button. That's what we're going to be creating. But now, there we go. We have an icon, which is great. Now, over to the right, we want a few different things. Number one, we want some placeholder text. So when the field is not active, it's going to display one thing. When the field is active, it'll display something else. So the or when it's not active, it'll display something like search, let's say videos, photos, and more, right? Of course, this placeholder text could be literally anything, as long as it relates to the actual design itself. And we're gonna choose something very simple, very traditional, something like Astoria Sands. You can go for, Helvetica if you want, something very simple. We're gonna make it a bit smaller. And we typically don't want the weight of these text layers, especially the placeholder text layers, to be too thick, right? So we're gonna go for something either like medium or Roman, which would be the equivalent of normal, something along those lines. And many times what you'll find is that the placeholder text has a decreased opacity. So if we just use this text or this color here, it's not terrible. It could certainly pass, although I might want to bump this up a touch, right? It can certainly pass, but I think I'm going to just drop either the opacity or increase the color, the brightness at least, right? Just something like that. And that could work, right? It would probably need a little bit of tweaking, but I think it's going to work. Now, over to the right-hand side, many search engines have various ways of searching. You can search with your voice, or you can search by photo, things like that, right? So we might want a few additional icons over here before we start wiring this up. So we'll do something like photo, and maybe we'll do a lot of different photos here. I can also hop into Nucleo, which is a third-party icon manager I use quite often, and I'll search for something like photo. And I'm mainly looking for a border-based icon for this particular icon here. So let's go ahead, and I have so many different icons, it's hard to find them sometimes. This one could work. This is from Nucleo itself, and I know I did have one from, you know what, I'm gonna copy it from another document, just so I'm not wasting too much time. And there's an icon, right? And then we might also want one for voice. So I'm going to do the same thing, copy and paste. Again, you can always search for something within your icons for design, like something like a mic, right? And you have a bunch of different icons that will definitely work for a project like this. All right. That's looking pretty good. Nice and simple. Umacorn says, forgot Howard was also doing the daily challenges. Yes, I am live once again. Although after this, I'm going to definitely need some coffee because I've butchered my words like 17 times already. All right, so we have our search engine looking decent, right? But I think I want to get a touch fancy with this. And this is completely optional. This is more just for my amusement. But if you've been following my master classes and my daily challenges, all sorts of different things, I have a brand that I kind of have been using throughout the last year, 2 years, whatever it might be. And that's the Boop brand. And I recently redid the logo, and I have the logo right here. Now, in many search engines, let me just change the color. Many search engines, what you'll find is you'll have, a logo over top of the search engine, something like this, right? And that looks fine and, it looks great. But as I was planning this, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be kind of interesting maybe to use the actual, like the inside of the O or the O's in Boop as the actual search field, right? That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to position it in the center, and I'm going to dive in here, and I'm going to move I'll just move this over to the side for now. I'm going to dive in. All this is vector-based, so I can very easily, look at that. Drag this out, drag this on this side, and then move the B, and then look at that. And then I probably don't need the border over there. And I might want to also dive in here and just grab these subtraction objects and just kind of shift them over a little bit. Somewhere right about there. Look at that. Isn't that fancy? When I first thought of this idea, I was like, I'm the most creative person on the planet. I don't know. It's fun. I'm not, but it's these little things that give you amusement during the day. All right, so we have our search field looking pretty good. Of course, you can put all sorts of different things around this, and we might get to that if we have time. But we want to get to the second part of this, is where we're going to actually convert this into a component and then wire this up. So we have two different states. A state where right now it's inactive, and then a state where you can click into it, and then you can not only see maybe a blinking text field, or like a text cursor, and you can also see some history of what you previously searched. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this entire group of objects here, and I want to turn this into a component. So I'm going to press the plus button over within the Properties Inspector to the right. Boop, there we go. And from here, we're going to go ahead and press the plus button one more time, and we're going to create a toggle state, which, very similar to a hover state, is wired up by default. Now, when it's wired up using auto animate. Now, there might not be much to animate between the two different states, so we may go ahead and dive in and make changes to that prototype. Hey, Megan, great to see you. Hockey season begins very soon, doesn't it? We're going to be enemies once again. All right. So I've gone ahead and created the toggle state, and now we can dive in and make some changes. So the first thing I want is to hide the placeholder text, just like that. Now, the next thing I think would be kind of interesting is to have a text correct. So I'm going to grab my my line tool and draw one out, right? So I can do something like this. I can leave it at that and call it a day, and it would work, right? But we want to get a bit fancy with this. So I think what could be interesting is if I go down to my plugins. Now, I don't know if there is one that I'll be able to find right away, but if I go to my Lottie Files plugin and search for something like text correct, I don't think there is one. There might be one. There might be one somewhere, right? Text, maybe. There probably isn't. If I search hard enough, I will find one. However, I do have one prepared. If I hop over to Finder, I have my text cursor right here. Maybe it's called a text cursor, I'll check. But I'm going to drag that one in, make it a little bit smaller. I can get rid of this other one. And I want to make sure that this is set to play automatically within the Properties Inspector and looping is turned on, right? Let me also try text cursor. I don't think that's going to work, but let's see. Oh, look at that. There we go. I just needed the right term. So you can drag this directly into your text fields, and it would look basically what's going to look like here. When I press play, look at that. Fancy, right? It's the little things in life. All right, so we have our state number 2 on the way, right? But what we might also want is, when someone clicks into this text field, it's going to display maybe a list of previously searched terms. So what we're going to do is I'm going to dive back into this state, and I'm going to grab my rectangle and draw one out down here. I'm not too concerned about the size because we're going to be using padding to automatically adjust the size as we need it, right? Maybe I'll round out the corners a little bit. Let's try about 8 for now. And I'm going to keep the color at white, but to separate it from the background a little bit, I'm going to apply a drop shadow. I'm going to bump it down quite a bit, maybe about 16, and then blur it quite a bit as well. Let's try 24. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of blue in there, just so it's nice and soft. Something around there. And if you really want to make sure that it's separated, you can also add a border around the outside, a very subtle border. But I think this is okay for now. So the first thing we're going to want is maybe on the top line here is just to kick it off so that users know what this box is, right? So I might want to dive in and type out something like recent searches. I'll apply this text color here. And in terms of the size, you know what? I think that could work. Maybe do I want to bump it up a little bit more? You don't want it too large. I'm going to bump up the weight a little bit to about bold. Maybe. I think that's an okay size, right? So I'm going to go ahead and select the text layer and also this background. I'm going to group it, and I'll call this history. And with that done, within the Properties Inspector, I'm going to turn on a stack, and which is also going to turn on padding. Now, the reason I turned on the stack is because we're going to have multiple line items, so that once a stack is on, we'll be able to very easily rearrange them, and then also, very easily duplicate them as well. Now, we don't want all this space on the left-hand side or the right-hand side and the bottom. Now, this is interesting here. We have, because it was basically looking inside of this group, and it was looking at the object at the top and the object at the bottom for the background, and it automatically defined that padding, which in this case we definitely don't want. We almost want it to be, full width. So I'm gonna undo this for a second. I'm gonna turn off the padding, And for the text layer at the top, right now it's set to this option here in the Properties Inspector, which is auto width. I'm going to switch it over to auto height and then manually drag this over to basically set the width. And now if I go ahead and turn stack on one more time, we have a nice amount of padding on the right. We don't have that crazy amount. We do have a lot of padding at the bottom, which we don't want. So I'm going to drop that down. What do we have at the top? 16. So I'll just drop it down to about 16 as well, right? So now we can dive in and start creating our line items. So I'm going to, again, these are going to be, I also want to make sure that this is set to a vertical stack. There we go. So these are going to be recent searches. So we can do something like, how can I become a better designer, right? Something we've probably all searched at one point in our lives. And I'm going to bump down the weight to maybe medium, maybe adjust the color just a little bit. That looks pretty good. Now I might also want, just to really hit home that this is a previously searched phrase or term, right? I might want some sort of an icon. So if I were to dive in here and either grab like a rectangle or an ellipse and draw one out, because we're inside of a vertical stack, it's pushing everything down. What it's supposed to do, but not what we want. So I'm going to group this object, call this, I'll just call this search or term or whatever it might be. And then inside of here, I can go ahead and, draw something out. Or I can grab an icon from, let's say, icons for design, maybe a clock. Whoop. The one thing I'm not a fan of that plugin, it just kind of moves things all over the place sometimes. There we go. Position this over this way. Move this over. Set this color so it's consistent. That looks pretty good. And then maybe we might also have a hover state, but over to the right, you might have an area where there's a delete button of some sort or a menu button or something to that effect, right? So what we can do is we can look up something like close. And that one could work. Again, the icon for design plugin goes all over the place. Turn off responsive resize, shrink it down a little bit, and I will position this all the way over on this side. Maybe drop the opacity. All right, that could work. So we've gone ahead and created our first line item, but now we want a few more going down this container. And because we're inside of a vertical stack, all we have to do is select that group and duplicate. And now I can dive in and make some changes. So something like, do we live in a simulation? Right? Why not? Have some fun. And I'll duplicate again. Can I use Comic Sans in a design project? Very important question. And why is it so hot outside? There we go. All right, so we've gone ahead and created our various line items, and we have our X's over to the right, which I would probably argue should not be visible at all times. You should probably have maybe a hover effect on each of these areas. And that X would appear only when hover takes place. But, for the sake of this example, we are going to leave it as is. Now I can also dive in here to the stack and then just adjust the padding in between each. I'm holding down my shift key and adjusting, or you can go to the overall group and adjust it right here within the Properties Inspector as well. That might be a bit too much. I'll bring it back. That could work. I'm not loving these X's. I'm going to actually go in and maybe drop the opacity. That could work, maybe. And you might also want, maybe over here to the right, maybe a way to clear all, for example. So in this case, I'm going to group this, because if I duplicate it or I add another object, it's going to pump it down, right? So I'm going to group it, and I'll call this header, and then inside of here, I'm going to maybe grab a rectangle, something like that. Maybe I'll round this out and type out clear all. over. Something like that, right? I would definitely make some tweaks to this so it blends in a little bit more, but obviously not too much more. But something like that could be interesting as well. Yeah. All right. So it's looking pretty good. It's getting there, right? But of course, we want to make sure that this all works. So we've gone ahead and created our toggle state. We have our default state. And because it's all wired up by default, we should be able to launch the preview and then simply click, and it's going to show us our next state, right? And we can click again to hide it. But you notice that there was a little bit of a delay, right? When I clicked on it, it kind of did this little fade, and then it started the lottie animation, and then the same thing happened again. We might want it to automatically, very quickly cut to the next state. So for that, I'm gonna hop into prototype mode right here at the top. And we do have over here the interaction already set up from the toggle state, right? Now, what I wanna do is instead of auto animate within the properties inspector, we're gonna switch it over to transition. But to make sure that it cuts immediately to the next state, we're gonna switch the animation from dissolve to none, just like that. And now if I press play one more time, we can now click, it's gonna automatically cut over, and we can click again to go back. Now, if we wanted to make sure that it doesn't dissolve on both of them, we'll just go to transition, none, and then we have, there we go. Now we could get a little bit fancy with this. If we did want some sort of animation, what we could do for the first state is we can actually start this off a little bit more of a condensed version. It may not make sense, but since we have a little bit of time, what we can do, I'm gonna dive in here, make this smaller, move this over a little bit, move this in, move our icons in. Right? And make sure all of this is centered. Oops. And then on this state here, we basically want to do, of course, we should have thought of this beforehand, but we want to make this a bit longer, right? Again, is this practical? Probably not, but it's kind of fun to experiment from time to time. I think that was 16 from the right. Grab these, move them over a little bit. Grab this, move that over as well. And then make sure everything is centered. All right, so default state, toggle state, and now if we were to just simply launch the preview and click, it's going to automatically cut because that's what we set inside of the properties inspector in prototype mode. But now we can go back and set up an auto animate, right? It's the importance of thinking things through beforehand, but sometimes experimentation is kind of fun. Hey Frank, great to see you. So I'm gonna go ahead, auto animate, that looks good, and phew, right? Again, is it practical? No, but we have a few minutes, so we might as well do it, right? There we go. Phew. Fancy. So again, you can, expand on this by adding some hover states to these searches down below. You can, have the X's for deleting appear only when the hover takes place. There's all sorts of things you can do with something like this. Definitely have some fun with it. And I would definitely encourage you, on a page like this to put some other things around, at the top right-hand corner. Put a profile picture. I'm gonna hop into toy faces very quickly. Boop, right? Put some additional links maybe up there. Maybe there's an images search. Something like that. Bold it a touch. Right align it. And shopping. Mail, right? And then you can put some additional things down here, maybe at the top left, all sorts of different things. But the main focus was definitely on using components, states, the toggle trigger, a little bit of lottie, auto animate to create this fun looking search field within Adobe XD. So I hope you all enjoyed not just this challenge, but all the challenges that I've covered this week. If you do want to go through and rewatch some of them from this week or weeks past, definitely head over to behance.net/challenge/XD. I'll be back next week with another XD masterclass, and I will see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.